To the House.
Call Dennis. Order. Call order. I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a sunset extension bill, and today being the 21st of June, the shortest day of the year, it's a shame that it can't also extend sunset today. That would be very welcome with the weather we've had. But, Mr. Speaker, the bill simply extends the regime for a further year while new legislation is developed. And I want to emphasise the term new legislation, because what New Zealand First does not expect is that the current regime will simply carry on after the delay for another year. Because what we expect is a rigorous examination of the current regime under the current legislation to in fact see if it does work, if it is in fact necessary and it achieves its stated objectives. And we don't know yet whether that is the case or not. So for the time being, New Zealand First will accept the bill as it is to extend the date for a further year and will support the bill. But it is better, Mr. Speaker, to get the legislation right and take that time, do that exercise, develop legislation which is worthwhile. And I'm not saying necessarily that the current legislation is a failure. I don't yet know that to be the case. But I do know this, Mr. Speaker, that the principles we consider in the new bill include these. First of all, being a prisoner means only being penalised by the temporary removal of personal liberty and incarceration. It doesn't mean anything more than that. They should still do daily work, they should live in a highly disciplined routine, but they should also have the opportunity for rehabilitation, education and reorientation in their direction of life. So secondly, it does not result in the loss of other rights. It doesn't result, for example, in the loss of rights to obtain rehabilitation, education and reorientation. It does not involve the loss of the right, it should not involve the loss of the right to vote. It does not mean the loss of the right to protection from personal or mental abuse. And it does not mean the loss of rights to services like decent medical care. It does not mean the loss of right to fair treatment. It does not mean the loss of right to adequate accommodation and meals. It does not mean the loss of right to accident compensation for genuine injury or disability from genuine accidents. And it does not mean the loss of right to compensation for substantial and genuine mistreatment. It does not mean the loss of the right to the right to practice religion and many, many other such rights that we all enjoy. It just means, as I've said, the loss of liberty for the period of the sentence. And, Mr. Speaker, on the other hand, the rights protected in this way must be balanced against the fact that there is concern in the community that prisoners abuse some of those rights, especially the right to compensation for mistreatment and especially abuse of accident compensation. And those are genuinely held beliefs and we must give some attention to them, but we certainly should not mollycoddle prisoners, and we should make sure that there are no rorts of the like that we've seen in recent times by some prisoners. So the final bill, when it eventually comes through for the substantial legislation, must still preserve those properly held rights, especially those which I've already mentioned. But it must also ensure that there is no abuse of those rights by prisoners. And I think that does mean that there need to be some special rules to avoid inappropriate claims for compensation for mistreatment or for accident compensation. So New Zealand First does adopt that position and is prepared, therefore, to consult with the Minister on those issues. And I certainly welcome the undertaking given by the Minister to consult other parties on those matters because, Mr Speaker, these are very difficult issues to sort out. Being fair on the one side, and I agree with the Green Party spokesman on this, that in fact prisoners can also be victims. And on the other hand, we must balance that with some sensible rules to make sure that abuse of rights by prisoners isn't possible, because that's what the community expects of us. So, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First will want to make sure that the substantive legislation, when it comes through, is appropriate in restricting claims by prisoners, because there is a case for that. On the other hand, prisoners can also be victims and their rights must also be protected. And as I said already, there is a balance to be held there, and I think that it should be possible to get a consensus of all parties in the House if we look at it in that way, achieving an appropriate balance which protects rights on the one hand and on the other, which meets community expectations that prisoners will not be able to abuse those rights, especially those giving rights to compensation, whether it be for mistreatment alleged or whether it be for accident compensation. So I think, Mr Speaker, that is where the debate should be centred, and that is the way New Zealand First will be looking at it. So New Zealand First will welcome the consultation process which has been promised and welcome in the end the debate on genuine new legislation when it comes through, based upon the facts when they are presented to us, so that we know in fact whether this legislation is needed and what in fact is needed to rectify anything which is not happening as it should in the current situation. But for the time being, Mr Speaker, New Zealand First will support the bill because it simply is a sunset extension bill, and we look forward to the policy development work to be had in the coming year.
Dr Jackie Bloom.
Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to take a very short call on the second reading of this bill.